Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. J.K. Rowling created a magical world everyone wants to enter. Let's be honest, it's hard to find a child who wouldn't trade their ordinary school for Hogwarts, and even adults admit they still dream about it. But for all the thought and fascination of the Harry Potter universe, it still has plenty of conventions and oddities that don't quite fit the overall logic. Sometimes they break the internal rules of the story, sometimes they just look absurd. Today I want to discuss exactly those moments. Of course, don't take my nitpicking too seriously. Every story is built on conventions. Still, let's take a closer look. Number 1. Long live our court. Wizards have astonishing tools that could make trials almost flawless. Veritaserum, legilimency, the pensieve. It seems simple, check the memories and learn the truth. But no, in wizarding courts, all of this is mysteriously ignored. That's why criminals escaped punishment by the dozen, hiding behind the Imperious Curse or claiming they had been forced. Some, like Karkaroff, were allowed to cut deals, while others were thrown into Azkaban without a trial at all. And there were times when Aurors had the right to kill without trial or investigation. Is that justice? I wasn't the only one to be handed over to the Dementors without trial. Crouch responded to violence with violence. You could say he became as ruthless and cruel as those who served Voldemort. Sirius Black, Harry Potter, and the Goblet of Fire. Perhaps the reason is that using magic in court would undermine the court's very authority. After all, many influential families might have lost their power. Number 2, introverted wizards. Flue powder is a common means of communication and travel. People use it for visits and conversations. Sirius even regularly chatted through a fireplace. But as soon as a child goes off to Hogwarts, this possibility seems to vanish. Didn't a single parent ever think to poke their head into the fire and ask, "How are things going at school?" In peacetime, there were no bans. Yet, we never see this happen. Either it simply wasn't customary, or the author preferred to leave it untouched. Still, in the 6th book, the Flue network was used to bring students back to school after the holidays, so clearly there were no technical restrictions. It was just a narrative convention. The Ministry arranged a one-way connection through the Flue network to allow students to return to the school quickly and safely. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. It makes you wonder, didn't this form of communication become a privilege only for pureblood families, since Muggle homes weren't connected to the network? Perhaps Dumbledore deliberately avoided such unfairness. Number 3, nowhere to hide. The magical world is supposed to be carefully hidden from Muggles, but the more you look, the clearer it becomes. The secret hangs by a thread. Every year, dozens of new people find out about magic. Spouses, parents, siblings of Muggle-borns, the Muggle Prime Minister who must be briefed by the Ministry, random witnesses whose memories weren't erased. The list goes on. Even Aunt Petunia, who despised magic, knew about Azkaban and Dementors. "They guard Azkaban, the wizard prison," said Aunt Petunia. Uncle Vernon looked at her in amazement. Harry's head was swimming. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. And what about Hermione's parents? They casually walked through Diagon Alley and even visited Gringotts. So, in the busiest spots of the wizarding world, you could often find Muggles. Then what kind of secrecy are we talking about? Number 4, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. One of the most absurd details, the existence of Nocturne Alley. Shops selling dark artifacts stand practically next door to Diagon Alley, where children and families stroll every day. After Voldemort's fall, the Ministry should have shut down such places or at least kept them under strict control. Instead, we see Borgin and Burke's, where a cursed necklace sat on display for years, nearly killing Katie Bell. It is said that the necklace has claimed the lives of 19 Muggles to date. Warning, do not touch. Cursed. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The Ministry searched Malfoy Manor top to bottom, yet turned a blind eye to what was happening in the heart of London. Knockturn Alley wasn't destroyed even after the campaign against Death Eaters. It simply emptied, not because of the law, but because customers were too afraid to be seen. Knockturn Alley looked completely deserted. Harry thought that in these times, no one wanted to risk being recognized buying items associated with the dark arts. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, number 5. Boundaries of magic. Where are they? Magic in Rowling's world could regrow bones, close deep wounds, and even pull victims back from the brink of death. Madame Pomfrey gave Harry Skelegro, and by the next morning his broken arm was whole again. Yet the same Harry still needed glasses every single day. Hermione once flicked her wand and whispered, "Oculus reparo," to fix his cracked lenses, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. If magic could repair glass in seconds, why not correct his vision permanently? The boundary between what spells could and could not do seemed less like natural law and more like convenience for the story. The same contradiction appeared in illnesses. Wizards brewed potions strong enough to heal burns from dragonfire, but a common cold left them sneezing just like muggles. St. Mungo's Hospital held cures for almost anything magical, yet Arthur Weasley nearly died from a snake bite, saved only by experimental remedies. Why could wizards tame death for one character but not for another? The inconsistency made magic feel limitless one moment and strangely powerless the next. Number 6. Why have a school then? For Hogwarts, magical children lived with their powers but had no training. Harry accidentally grew his hair overnight, shrank a sweater that Aunt Petunia forced him to wear, and even landed on the school roof after a jump. None of this was under control. The Dursleys panicked, but there was no guidance until Hagrid appeared. If a child could summon snakes or teleport by accident, how safe was it to let them go untrained for 11 years? The danger was not just to themselves, but to everyone around them. Then came Hogwarts, a castle full of spells, but with little attention to ordinary learning. Ron Weasley could duel a wizard but could not write an essay without Hermione's help. Even Hermione, the brightest student, admitted she had studied arithmetic with Muggle teachers before Hogwarts because she would never see math again inside the school walls. Harry had never had lessons in maths or spelling, but he could fight a troll, Philosopher's Stone. Wizards chose magic over knowledge, leaving their children half-educated in the wider sense. This gap raised real problems. How could a witch live in the Muggle world without the simplest skills? How could wizards trade with Muggles, write contracts, or read maps? The wizarding world seemed proud of its separation, but it came at a cost. Children were trained to duel and brew potions, but not to think as citizens of a broader world. For all its glory, Hogwarts was a school that left half of education behind. Number 7, Azkaban, prison or torture. Azkaban was not a prison. It was despair turned into stone walls. The Dementors drained every thought of happiness, leaving only fear and emptiness behind. Sirius Black described it with chilling clarity. They don't need walls and water to keep the prisoners in, not when they're inside your head, drowning you in your own worst memories. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. For him, an innocent man, the punishment was worse than death. His body survived, but his soul was scarred forever. The Ministry of Magic called this justice. Cornelius Fudge visited Azkaban and spoke of the Dementors as loyal guards, yet their very nature was cruelty. Prisoners who had committed crimes might deserve confinement, but did they deserve to have their very will to live stolen away? Even Barty Crouch Sr., known for his harsh policies, admitted that Dementors made men soulless long before their sentence was up. The system was built not on fairness, but on fear. This is what makes Azkaban such a contradiction. Wizards could brew potions of truth, cast spells of protection, or build prisons no one could escape. Instead, they chose torment as policy. A so-called civilized society legalized torture, and even the innocent were swallowed by it. When Harry heard that the Dementors guard Azkaban, the wizard prison, Harry Potter, and the prisoner of Azkaban, he realized the truth. The magical world was not kinder than the Muggle one. In some ways, it was far darker. Number 8. Magic and technology. Why not together? Arthur Weasley once told Harry, "Muggle devices don't work here, Harry." Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The explanation was simple. Magic disrupted electricity and modern technology. Yet Hogwarts itself was filled with clocks, lanterns, and enchanted devices that looked suspiciously like their Muggle counterparts. If magic destroyed technology, how did these objects function so flawlessly? It was as if wizards drew a line between what they considered magical and what they considered Muggle, even when the difference was only in name. Colin Creevey's camera made the contradiction even clearer. He used it constantly in Harry's second year, snapping pictures in the castle and even at Quidditch matches. Not only did the camera work, but with the addition of a developing potion, his photos moved. The machine was pure Muggle technology, yet it functioned in the heart of Hogwarts. The rule against Muggle devices collapsed the moment Colin raised his camera and captured Harry mid-flight. The wizarding world itself embraced other strange exceptions. There were wizard radios which broadcast across Britain, and even wizarding wireless sets which mimicked Muggle inventions almost exactly. If magic really rendered Muggle devices useless, why bother creating magical versions at all? The Weasley family gathered around their wizarding wireless just as any Muggle family gathered around their radio. The line between what worked and what didn't seemed more like choice than law. This inconsistency makes the magical world feel stuck between two eras. Wizards prided themselves on being superior to Muggles, yet they copied their tools and claimed them as their own. The truth is clear. If Muggle technology truly failed around magic, Colin Creevey's photographs could never have existed. The contradiction remains one of the greatest mysteries of J.K. Rowling's world. Why accept a camera but not a telephone? Why fear the Muggle but still imitate him? Number 9. The great and terrible sport. Quidditch was meant to be the pride of the wizarding world, yet its rules make little sense when examined closely. The golden snitch is worth 150 points, more than any chaser could ever hope to score. In Harry's very first match, Oliver Wood explained the truth. "You catch this, Potter, and the game's over. You catch this, and we win." Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In that moment, the efforts of the chasers and keeper were reduced to background noise. The entire match rested on the seeker alone. The absurdity shows in Harry's second year. Slytherin had trained Draco Malfoy as their new seeker. The rest of the team even received Nimbus 2001 broomsticks to give him an advantage. Yet despite the shiny equipment, the game ended the moment Harry caught the snitch in his mouth. The score was irrelevant. The Seeker's skill erased all the work of the other players in seconds. The crowd cheered, but the imbalance was impossible to ignore. Even the Quidditch World Cup, the greatest stage of the sport, exposed the flaw. In the final match between Ireland and Bulgaria, Victor Krum caught the snitch while his team was still trailing. Bulgaria lost instantly. Why? Because the points from the snitch could not close the gap. Krum wanted to end it on his own terms, the announcers cried, but the outcome proved the futility of the system. The Star Seeker made his move, and still the game ended in defeat. Despite this illogic, Quidditch became a cultural icon. Hogwarts students lived for it, the Daily Prophet covered it, and families travelled across countries to watch it. But when rules allow one player to decide everything, what does that say about wizarding priorities? Perhaps Quidditch was never about fairness or balance. It was about drama, spectacle, and the thrill of the snitch flashing across the field. For Harry, it was glory. For the sport itself, it was chaos dressed as tradition. Number 10, a hole in Hogwarts defences. Hogwarts was said to be the safest place in the wizarding world. Dumbledore himself declared it, and the students believed it. Yet from the very first book, the castle's defences proved questionable. Professor Quirrell, hiding Voldemort beneath his turban, managed to live inside the school for an entire year. He even attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone from under the professors' noses. Harry himself recalled, "They said Hogwarts was the safest place after Gringotts, Harry Potter, and the Philosopher's Stone. But safe for whom?" The story of Peter Pettigrew is even stranger. Disguised as Ron's pet rat Scabbers, he lived in Gryffindor Tower for years. Pettigrew was not just a fugitive, he was one of Voldemort's most loyal followers. Yet the castle's enchantments never revealed him, not even the Marauders map, created by Remus Lupin, James Potter, Sirius Black, and Pettigrew himself, raised suspicion until Harry stumbled upon his name by accident in the third book. A Death Eater was literally sleeping in a student's bed. And then there is Tom Riddle. As a boy, he discovered the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets and unleashed a basilisk upon the school. Students were petrified, one nearly killed. Years later, the same chamber opened again under Harry's eyes. The protections around Hogwarts never stopped it, because the threat came from inside. It shows that the walls and spells guarded against outsiders, but not against dark ambitions already within. Looking back, Hogwarts seems less like a fortress and more like a stage for danger. Trolls in bathrooms, dementors on the Quidditch field, cursed objects in the corridors. Each year brought another breach. The promise of safety was an illusion, and the children learned the hard way that the castle's magic could not shield them from betrayal or evil hiding in plain sight. Number 11. Where are all the adults? During the Triwizard Tournament, the adults seemed to vanish. The champions faced dragons, mermaids, and a maze filled with deadly traps. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort, and Harry barely escaped with his life. Yet the professors and ministry officials who were supposed to oversee the event stood by helplessly. The danger was obvious from the beginning, but no one stepped in. It was as if the adults had chosen to watch, even if it meant sending students to their deaths. The Quidditch World Cup offered another example, a joyful night of sport turned into terror when Death Eaters stormed the camp. Families ran in panic, Muggles were tortured, fires burned across the tents. Harry, Hermione, and the Weasleys had to protect themselves in the chaos. And where was Cornelius Fudge? Where were the Aurors? They arrived only after the worst was over, long after the crowd had scattered. Harry remembered the silence. Everyone was fighting, but where was the minister? Where were the Aurors? Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. It is strange when we think about the power these adults had. Wizards can apparate instantly across the country. They can travel through the Flu network in seconds. But during crises, the authorities always came late. In the third book, Dementors surrounded the school, yet they attacked Harry during a Quidditch match with no warning from the Ministry. Even Professor Dumbledore, one of the greatest wizards of his age, often acted only after the damage was done. This absence makes the story darker. The children are forced to fight battles that should have belonged to the grown-ups. Harry duels Voldemort as a teenager, Hermione solves riddles that the Ministry ignores, and Ron faces creatures he should never have seen. The world of Harry Potter is full of powerful adults, but in the moments that mattered, they were nowhere to be found. Number 12. Time Magic and its Forgotten Power. Under the shadow of Hogwarts' ancient towers, one of the strangest and most unsettling truths about the wizarding world lingers in silence: the existence of time magic. Among all the spells, charms, and artifacts crafted through centuries of magical experimentation, nothing carries a more terrifying weight than the Time Turner. Its appearance in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban was deceptively simple, almost domestic. Hermione Granger used it to attend multiple classes at once, slipping unnoticed between transfiguration and divination. Yet hidden within this small golden hourglass was a force that could unravel the very fabric of reality. What appeared to be a clever schoolgirl's tool was, in truth, an object capable of reshaping destiny. The strangest part is how casually it was entrusted to a student. Professor McGonagall obtained special permission for Hermione, warning her of its dangers, but the Ministry still allowed the device to pass into the hands of a 13-year-old. This decision alone speaks volumes about the reckless contradictions within the magical establishment. Wizards feared uncontrolled power, yet they distributed it in ways that bordered on negligence. The Ministry's archive of time-turners, stored in the Department of Mysteries, supposedly held the last of these instruments. But when one remembers how Hermione and Harry used it to save both Buckbeak and Sirius Black, the question rises like a storm. If time can be twisted to rescue a single life, why not to prevent entire wars? The Ministry's official account is that every time-turner was destroyed in the chaos of the battle at the Department of Mysteries. The glass shattering, the sand scattering, time itself folding upon itself in violent collapse. It sounds dramatic, but also convenient. A whole collection of one of the most dangerous magical tools, gone in a single night with no possibility of recovery. Readers of the saga may recall how J.K. Rowling herself sealed this loophole deliberately, ensuring the story would not be undone by an endless cycle of revisions. Yet within the world itself, this explanation feels thin. Would the Department of Mysteries, a place so dedicated to secrets and research, truly store every time-turner in one location? Was there not a single wizard paranoid enough to hide one away, to protect a weapon that might one day shift history? Hermione herself admitted the peril. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, she trembled when speaking of the device. This was extremely dangerous. We could have been seen. That small line holds within it a warning about paradoxes, about worlds colliding with themselves. Indeed, Dumbledore understood it well. When he instructed Harry and Hermione to use the time-turner to save Sirius, his words carried careful restraint. You must not be seen. His calm but urgent tone carried the awareness that time, once disrupted, might devour itself. But such warnings only deepen the mystery. If the dangers were so evident, how could the Ministry not see the risk of leaving these artifacts accessible? The temptation of rewriting history looms heavily over wizarding society. Imagine if Cornelius Fudge, desperate to preserve his power, had used a time-turner to silence Dumbledore before his warnings spread. Or if Voldemort's followers, many of whom infiltrated the Ministry, had seized the device to bring back their master earlier. The timeline of the Wizarding War could have shattered into chaos. And yet, despite such possibilities, the story we are told insists that all devices were destroyed in one night of battle. It almost feels like a cover-up, as though the Ministry preferred to hide the truth rather than confront the fact that time itself had been slipping through its fingers. There is also the question of morality. Would it have been right to go back in time and prevent the birth of Voldemort? Could such an action erase not only the Dark Lord, but also countless lives shaped by the struggle against him? Harry's very identity was forged in the crucible of resistance. If time had been altered, would Lily's sacrifice have ever taken place, binding Harry to the magic of love? The time-turner forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that the wizarding world, despite its enormous power, often chose suffering over intervention. Perhaps Dumbledore's famous words, "It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live," apply here more than ever. Time travel tempts the wizard to chase a dream of correction, but in doing so, they risk losing reality itself. Yet one cannot escape the chilling notion that somewhere, hidden deep in vaults or secret rooms, a time-turner still exists. Wizards are not known for destroying power willingly. Just as Horcruxes endured because of greed and fear, so too might a single forgotten time-turner have survived. It is easy to imagine an unspeakable pocketing one during the battle, tucking it away with the thought that perhaps one day it could be useful. In such secrecy lies the essence of the magical world, truth hidden behind bureaucratic masks, artifacts buried beneath silence. Number 13, House Elves and Slavery in Plain Sight. Of all the peculiarities that J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World presents, few are as unsettling as the casual acceptance of house elf servitude. It is not simply a background detail, it is a structure, a silent engine that powers the comfort and grandeur of wizarding society. At the heart of this paradox lies the contradiction between a community that sees itself as progressive and enlightened, yet quietly tolerates the presence of bound, unpaid magical beings who cook, clean, and sacrifice themselves without ever being truly seen. The reader is invited into a Hogwarts feast where golden platters materialize before hungry students, but rarely do we stop to ask who places the food on the table. The truth is that a hidden army of house elves toils beneath the castle, their lives devoted to labor that is never acknowledged as labor at all. Hogwarts becomes the most glaring example of this strange hypocrisy. The Great Hall is forever filled with food that appears as if by magic, yet in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Hermione uncovers the reality. More than 100 house elves live in the castle kitchens, working tirelessly to prepare meals, scrub pots, and maintain the endless demands of a school that hosts hundreds of children and dozens of teachers. Their work is not recognized, not rewarded, and not even openly discussed. For generations of witches and wizards, the existence of this invisible workforce has been treated as something natural, unquestionable, as though it were part of the castle walls themselves. It is in this atmosphere that Hermione Granger becomes the lone dissenting voice. When she learns the truth, she is horrified, and her moral compass directs her to act. In her eyes, the presence of enslaved magical creatures beneath the floors of Hogwarts is intolerable. Her outrage is so great that she founds the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, or SPEW, a group intended to campaign for the liberation of house elves. Yet her classmates, Harry and Ron included, laugh at her. Ron dismisses her activism as obsessive and unnecessary, insisting they like being enslaved. He even quotes the words that echo throughout wizarding prejudice. "House elves is not paid, sir. House elves is not asking for clothes, sir." These beliefs are so deeply ingrained that even the most kind-hearted characters fail to see the injustice. The case of Dobby, perhaps the most famous house elf in the series, underscores the painful irony. Introduced in the Chamber of Secrets, Dobby suffers under the cruel dominion of the Malfoy family. He is beaten, humiliated, and punished for even the smallest disobedience. His greatest dream is freedom, a simple pair of socks that would sever the bond between elf and master. When Harry tricks Lucius Malfoy into freeing him, the moment feels triumphant, and Dobby's gratitude is overwhelming. Yet this act of liberation is treated as an anomaly, a quirky side story. The wizarding world does not follow Harry's example. Dobby himself is seen as strange for wanting freedom, while most other elves remain bound and submissive, living and dying in shadows without complaint. Hermione's discovery in the Hogwarts kitchens magnifies the disturbing complacency of others. She encounters Winky, the dismissed elf of Barty Crouch, who, even in her dismissal, weeps for the loss of her servitude. Winky's grief shocks Hermione, but the narrative uses this scene to reveal the deep indoctrination that elves experience. They are taught from birth to see slavery as their natural role, and even the thought of freedom terrifies them. Winky clings to her chains with a loyalty that appears tragic rather than noble. It forces readers to confront the uncomfortable reality that cultural conditioning can make even the most oppressed defend their own oppression. What makes this issue so haunting is the blindness of those who should know better. Dumbledore, a figure often portrayed as the epitome of wisdom and justice, is fully aware of the house elves in Hogwarts. He acknowledges Hermione's concerns but never takes any true action to dismantle the system. When pressed, he argues that elves are happier in their service, that interfering with their way of life might do more harm than good. His words may sound pragmatic, but they echo the same excuses that human societies have historically used to justify slavery and exploitation. Dumbledore's passivity reveals the depth of the hypocrisy. Even the wisest wizard of his age quietly tolerates a moral scandal under his very roof. The fact that Hogwarts students joke about Hermione's activism highlights the generational indifference. Ron's words are particularly telling. "They live for it, Hermione. They like being enslaved." His remark is not malicious, but it reflects the internalized belief that the system is natural, immutable, and even beneficial. Harry himself, though more sympathetic, never joins Hermione's crusade. For a boy who spends his entire life resisting tyranny, his indifference to the plight of house elves feels like a glaring oversight. He enjoys the fruits of their labor, feasts at their tables, sleeps in beds they prepare, yet never confronts the moral debt he owes them. The deeper contradiction lies in the broader themes of the series. The wizarding world wages battles against prejudice, oppression, and tyranny. The fight against Voldemort is portrayed as a fight for equality and freedom, yet in the very heart of that world, systemic slavery thrives unnoticed. Wizards demand their own freedom but deny it to those beneath them. They rally against the idea of blood purity, yet turn a blind eye to the magical creatures who are bound by invisible chains. This inconsistency undermines the moral authority of their struggle. What does victory against evil mean if the oppressed remain invisible? Number 14. Magic money. Why are the Weasleys so poor? Of all the mysteries that the wizarding world presents, the question of money and poverty lingers with a strange sense of contradiction, almost as if J.K. Rowling deliberately left a riddle unsolved in plain sight. In a world where transfiguration can turn a teacup into a rat and charms can repair broken glasses or mend bones overnight, the idea of poor families struggling to make ends meet feels unsettling. The Weasleys, one of the most prominent wizarding families in the story, stand at the heart of this paradox. Ron himself tells Harry in Philosopher's Stone, "We're not rich, we are poor." His embarrassment echoes throughout the series, whether it is his second-hand robes, the patched-up school books, or the battered old wand that constantly misfires. Yet the reader cannot help but ask, if wizards can duplicate items or conjure food on the table, why does poverty exist at all? The very first time Harry encounters the Weasleys in Philosopher's Stone, their warmth immediately outshines their material lack. At King's Cross, Molly Weasley offers to help Harry with the barrier, surrounded by her lively children. Their robes are shabby, their trunks battered, but their family spirit burns strong. Still, from that moment onward, Harry observes the contrast between his own unexpected wealth, piles of gold stored in his Gringotts vault, and Ron's embarrassment about his family's situation. The question becomes not only a matter of magical logic, but also of social justice. How does inequality thrive in a world that supposedly bends to the will of a wand? A closer look at magical laws hints at restrictions designed to keep society from collapsing into chaos. For instance, the principle of Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration clearly establishes that food cannot be conjured from nothing, only multiplied or summoned. This law, mentioned by Hermione in Deathly Hallows, suggests that some essentials cannot be created out of thin air. However, this explanation barely scratches the surface. If food cannot be conjured, what about clothing? What about cauldrons, parchment, and quills? Why must the Weasleys endure worn-out robes when Molly Weasley, a skilled witch, could presumably strengthen fabric with enchantments to make them last forever? The reader is left to wrestle with an inconsistency that sits awkwardly at the heart of Rowling's world-building. The Weasley home itself, the Burrow, is a perfect example of magical ingenuity coupled with financial limitation. It is patched together with spells, visibly leaning and swaying, yet still standing tall thanks to Molly's charms. Here, magic replaces the need for money in some ways, but not entirely. Why should a family capable of building such a home still struggle to buy school supplies? In Chamber of Secrets, the scene at Flourish and Blotts is humiliating for the Weasleys. Ginny must purchase used books, and Ron's wand breaks soon after. This contrasts painfully with the sight of Draco Malfoy, who sneers in his brand-new robes with armfuls of shiny books. If wizards can copy items, why not duplicate textbooks? It seems that certain duplications, perhaps considered illegal or unsustainable, are taboo. Still, this taboo is never properly explained, leaving the reader wondering if the poverty itself is less a necessity of magic and more a narrative device to highlight class divides. Arthur Weasley's career also shines a light on this economic riddle. He is a fully employed ministry wizard, yet his wages are meagre. His passion for Muggle artifacts keeps him in a poorly funded office at the Ministry of Magic, with no promotion for years. Even when his work proves crucial, such as his role during Order of the Phoenix and his survival after Nagini's attack, the family does not suddenly gain more wealth. The ministry, it seems, mirrors the bureaucratic realities of the Muggle world, where low-paying jobs limit families despite hard work. But again, one wonders, why not supplement income by brewing potions for profit or selling enchanted goods? Fred and George prove later in the series that such ventures can make a fortune, their joke shop thriving even in wartime. If the twins could become wealthy through creativity, what prevented Arthur and Molly from using their magical talents in a similar way? Molly Weasley in particular represents another paradox. She is described as a powerful witch capable of commanding her large household, conjuring meals, and, in Deathly Hallows, defeating Bellatrix Lestrange in a duel that shocks even Harry. This strength raises the uncomfortable question: if Molly could handle such powerful spells, why couldn't she channel her skills into creating goods for sale? Potions, protective charms, or even enchanted household objects could have provided income. The answer may lie in cultural values. Molly prioritizes her children and the home, embodying the role of the archetypal mother. Yet even so, the harsh reality of her children's struggles, Ginny's second-hand robes, Ron's endless embarrassment, Percy's hunger for status, forces the reader to feel that this poverty is almost artificially imposed upon them by the structure of the wizarding world. It is also worth noting how the Weasleys are treated socially because of their poverty. The Malfoys repeatedly sneer at them, calling them blood traitors, not just for associating with Muggles, but also for their lack of wealth. In Chamber of Secrets, Draco mocks Ron for his hand-me-down robes, saying, "You'll be next, Weasley, with your family's money problems." The insult lands hard because it reflects a very real inequality. Poverty in the wizarding world does not merely mean fewer possessions, it brings humiliation, exclusion, and stigma. This suggests that Rowling deliberately mirrored the inequalities of the Muggle world, embedding them into wizard society to make the Weasleys stand out as symbols of warmth and moral strength despite economic weakness. Number 15. Schooling without exams. Of all the mysteries within the world of Harry Potter, perhaps the most unsettling is not the presence of Dementors or the survival of Voldemort, but the educational system at Hogwarts itself. Here stands a school proclaimed as the finest institution of magical learning in Britain, with traditions stretching back centuries, yet its inner workings appear chaotic, inconsistent, and at times dangerously irresponsible. The strangest detail is that students pass through the first 5 years without any formal testing at all, drifting from subject to subject, with their progress assessed only through scattered essays, homework, and the subjective whims of teachers whose methods would never be accepted in a Muggle environment. It is only in the 5th year that students are confronted with the ordinary wizarding levels, the OWLs, and later, in the 7th year, with the NEWTs. Until then, no structure of accountability exists, and the learning of young witches and wizards rests entirely on the uneven shoulders of Hogwarts staff. Consider the first year's children as young as 11, who are plunged into classes of potions, transfiguration, and charms without any form of standard test or check to confirm that they understand the foundations of magic. A Muggle school would never allow 5 years to pass without some form of external examination to measure progress. Yet at Hogwarts, nothing stands between the child and their magical mistakes. The terrifying image of Seamus Finnegan constantly blowing up his cauldron is played for humour. But beneath it lies a troubling reality. He could have gone on like this for years without formal correction. Hermione Granger, brilliant and studious, was forced to excel entirely out of personal discipline, not because the school demanded measurable results before the Albwells. It paints a world where natural talent and private diligence become the only safeguards against educational collapse. The absurdity becomes even clearer when examining the quality of teachers. Professors at Hogwarts are chosen at the sole discretion of Albus Dumbledore, a brilliant wizard, but hardly a trained administrator of education. Severus Snape, for instance, was an expert in potions but used his position less as an instructor and more as a platform for cruelty. His treatment of students bordered on psychological abuse, and his open hatred toward Harry Potter was displayed before the entire class. The narrative provides painful clarity. Professor Snape was looking at Harry as though he were a particularly foul-smelling piece of refuse. "Potter!" he spat. "Why is it always you?" Such venom would have seen him removed from a Muggle classroom immediately, yet at Hogwarts it was tolerated, even normalized, for decades. Snape's approach to teaching was not simply harsh, it was destructive to the very foundation of learning. Instead of encouraging inquiry and guiding students through the intricacies of potion-making, he demanded absolute silence and punished curiosity. Neville Longbottom lived in terror of potions class, reduced to trembling incompetence, not because of a lack of ability, but because his professor delighted in his humiliation. A school with no structured evaluations for teachers allowed this pattern to persist unchecked. If Hogwarts had been subject to inspection by an external board, as any serious institution should be, Snape would have been forced either to reform his methods or face removal. Instead, his reign of intimidation continued until he left the post decades later, not because of professional accountability, but because of larger political events. Worse still is the case of Gilderoy Lockhart, perhaps the most scandalous appointment ever made at Hogwarts. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, he arrived as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, beloved by the public, yet utterly unqualified for the task of teaching. Lockhart could not even perform basic defensive magic. His lessons were elaborate performances centered on himself. "Let me introduce you to your new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Me," he announced, with smug delight, more interested in signing autographs than teaching spells. When confronted with Cornish pixies, he lost control of his classroom, leaving 11-year-olds to clean up his disaster. His incompetence was so glaring that even the students saw through him. How, then, was such a man permitted to hold a teaching post in a school where children's safety depended on his expertise? The Lockhart debacle highlights the dangerous consequences of Dumbledore's unchecked authority in staffing. There were no vetting processes, no background checks, no professional standards. If a man with falsified accomplishments and stolen glory could secure a teaching role, what does that say about the ministry's oversight? In fact, it was later revealed that Lockhart had built his career by stealing the stories of other witches and wizards, erasing their memories, and publishing their feats as his own. A single interview or demonstration of skill would have exposed him, yet Hogwarts welcomed him without question. The system that allowed him into the classroom was either criminally negligent or willfully blind. The Ministry of Magic's role in this cannot be ignored. One would assume that a government so invested in regulating magic and controlling its use would be deeply involved in the training of young wizards. Yet, the ministry appeared content to let Dumbledore manage Hogwarts as he pleased, intervening only when political advantage was at stake, such as in the appointment of Dolores Umbridge in Harry's 5th year. This inconsistency reveals a chilling truth. The education of an entire generation was considered secondary to the politics of the wizarding world. The lack of regular inspections or teaching standards meant that students like Harry, Hermione, and Ron were constantly at the mercy of their professors' personalities rather than a coherent curriculum. Even when formal examinations finally appear, they reveal the absurdity of the prior years. The Albwells are overwhelming in scope, testing students on subjects they have been studying without structured assessment for half a decade. Hermione predictably excels, but many students like Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom stagger under the sudden pressure. How could such students possibly prepare when no minor assessments guided them along the way? In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry describes the owls as the most exhausting period of his life, saying, "They seem to be going through the whole of their education, but this is not the natural culmination of a gradual process, but a sudden trial by fire. Failure at this stage could doom a student's career, not because of innate lack of ability, but because of years of unstructured guidance. Moreover, the uneven quality of professors means that students face wildly different levels of preparation depending on who happens to be teaching their subject. Defense against the dark arts, cursed to change every year, left students without continuity. Some years they had practical mastery, as with Remus Lupin, who taught them to repel Dementors with the Patronus charm and offered supportive, clear lessons. Other years they faced incompetence, fraud, or outright hostility, as with Lockhart, Mad-Eye Moody's imposter, or Umbridge. A student's defense. Skills depended entirely on luck, on whether the professor of the year could teach. In a world where dark wizards lurked in shadows, this inconsistency endangered not just education, but lives. The story of Dolores Umbridge demonstrates the ministry's failure from another angle. Unlike Lockhart, she was not incompetent in the conventional sense. She was malicious. Sent to Hogwarts under the guise of High Inquisitor, she represented political interference disguised as accountability. Yet her inspections focused not on improving teaching, but on rooting out dissent and controlling students. She banned practical defensive spells, reduced the curriculum to meaningless theory, and punished resistance with cruelty. The quote, "I really hate children," attributed to her smug expression and actions, reflects her attitude. Once again, Hogwarts children became pawns in a political struggle, their education derailed by the personal agenda of those in power. Thus, the rare occasion when the ministry exerted control only made matters worse. Another curious absence is any system for student feedback. In modern education, students may evaluate their teachers, allowing administrators to adjust and reform. At Hogwarts, no such mechanism exists. Harry and his peers often complained about Snape or expressed their frustrations with Lockhart, yet no adult authority seemed interested in their perspective. The only time student voices carried weight was when they organized rebellions, as with Dumbledore's army. Until the students secretly trained themselves in defense against the dark arts, they were trapped in Umbridge's sterile classrooms. It was not the institution that saved them, but their own initiative. In a sense, Hogwarts outsourced its educational responsibility to the very children it was supposed to protect. It is also worth noting that Hogwarts lacks the concept of standardized curricula across magical Britain. If Hogwarts is truly the most prestigious school, what does that imply about other institutions? Do they also lack examinations until the 5th year? Do they also allow unqualified or malicious professors to run free? The silence of the narrative suggests that this is systemic, not localized. The magical world itself seems indifferent to formal education, prioritizing tradition, bloodlines, and personal networks over structured learning. This indifference is startling when one remembers that poorly trained witches and wizards can endanger not only themselves but also the Muggle world through magical accidents. One of the most telling passages comes from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, where it is written, "Professor Snape was watching Harry closely. He looked as though he was determined to find fault with him." Here, the text highlights not only Snape's hostility, but the very fact that the learning environment was poisoned by personal bias. Harry's potential in potions was never developed because his teacher would not permit it. Hermione succeeded despite the system, not because of it. Ron and Neville were crippled by low confidence instilled by those who should have nurtured them. Hogwarts, therefore, becomes a paradox, a place of great learning for some and of long-term damage for others. The uneven landscape of Hogwarts education raises the question of how many talented students were lost to this negligence. How many children, like Neville, had brilliance within them that was stifled by fear and humiliation? How many students left school underprepared for the dangers of the world, saved only by luck or connections? The magical world celebrates Hogwarts as a symbol of tradition, but its traditions are riddled with flaws. It is a world where the future of generations hangs precariously on the temperament of professors, the whims of Dumbledore, and the interference of a ministry that cares more for control than competence. This strangeness is perhaps one of the hardest truths to accept in the kicked Harry Potter universe. The most prestigious magical school is also one of the least accountable. Number 16. Who runs the ministry? The Ministry of Magic is presented as the highest authority in the wizarding world, yet every reader of the Harry Potter series feels an immediate tension between what the ministry is supposed to be and what it actually is. Its marble halls, golden statues, and endless floors of offices create an image of efficiency and order, but behind the polished facade lies an unstable institution. The problem begins with its leadership. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, for much of Harry's story, embodies the contradictions of this authority. Officially, the minister is an elected figure representing the magical population. In practice, however, Fudge governs as though his personal whims are more important than the voice of the people. The result is a strange hybrid, part democracy, part dictatorship, part circus. When readers look closer, they discover a system that often undermines itself, an organization with immense power that somehow manages to accomplish very little. The ministry is filled with contradictions that make it feel less like a government and more like a stage play. Laws exist, but their enforcement is erratic. Consider the underage magic restriction. Harry is reprimanded almost instantly for conjuring a Patronus to save himself and Dudley from Dementors in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Yet the ministry overlooks countless infractions by pure-blood families who have long used their influence to escape. Punishment. Lucius Malfoy openly bribes officials, manipulates laws, and uses his wealth to sway the Wizengamot. This double standard creates a world where rules seem fluid, where justice depends not on what is right, but on who has the most power behind the scenes. For a government tasked with maintaining secrecy, order, and safety, such selective enforcement exposes its fragility. The quote, "Fudge was most afraid for his own position," from Order of the Phoenix, encapsulates the essence of this flawed leadership. Fudge's obsession with personal security overshadows his duty to protect the magical community. When confronted with evidence of Voldemort's return, he chooses denial over action, terrified that admitting the truth would shatter his credibility. Instead of preparing the wizarding world for danger, he spends energy discrediting Harry and Dumbledore. This is not the behavior of a leader committed to the safety of his people. It is the behavior of a man protecting his chair. Through this, Rowling illustrates that the ministry is less about governance and more about appearances, where power is exercised to maintain illusion rather than ensure stability. Bureaucracy inside the ministry only deepens this absurdity. Each department appears important: Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Department of Magical Games and Sports, Department of Mysteries, but the division of power fragments the system. Files are lost in mountains of paperwork, decisions are delayed by committees, and countless witches and wizards waste their careers in meaningless office tasks. Arthur Weasley, stuck in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, is a perfect example. His genuine expertise and curiosity are wasted in a tiny department with no influence. When one of the few honest men in the ministry spends his time chasing bewitched toasters, while Lucius Malfoy holds sway over top officials, readers can only conclude that the institution is broken from within. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, supposedly the backbone of security, functions inconsistently. The Aura Office houses brave figures like Alastor Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt, yet their work is constantly undermined by political pressure. During the rise of Voldemort, instead of giving Aurors freedom to act, the Ministry constrains them with endless regulations and uses them to target political enemies rather than actual criminals. Dolores Umbridge's role within the Ministry highlights this failure. She is granted extraordinary power to reshape Hogwarts, introducing cruel punishments and stripping Dumbledore of authority, while the real enemy gathers strength unchecked. Her presence proves that loyalty to the Minister outweighs competence or morality. The Ministry, in elevating such figures, demonstrates that its priorities lie not in justice, but in consolidating control. The absurdity becomes even clearer when we look at how the Ministry treats Hogwarts. This school is the single most important institution for the magical youth of Britain, yet the Ministry interferes only when it fears losing political control. For years, children faced dangers, from a basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets to a mass murderer allegedly hiding on the grounds in Prisoner of Azkaban, and the Ministry remained strangely passive. Only when Dumbledore's influence threatened Cornelius Fudge's position did the Ministry suddenly decide to intervene. By sending Umbridge as High Inquisitor, they turned education into a political battlefield. Safety of students was never the goal, silencing opposition was. It is a chilling example of how the Ministry places political calculation above the well-being of its citizens. Rowling's narrative suggests that the Ministry is designed to mirror real-world governments plagued by inefficiency and corruption. Its endless corridors and enchanted elevators symbolize the labyrinth of bureaucracy, where officials spend more time jostling for influence than addressing real threats. Even the Ministry's physical destruction during the Battle of the Seven Potters in Deathly Hallows is symbolic. For all its power, the building is vulnerable. Once Voldemort's followers infiltrate, the Ministry becomes a puppet institution, proving that its structure was never strong enough to resist determined tyranny. A government built on fear and illusion crumbles the moment real power arrives. The Wizengamot, the Wizarding High Court, reflects another weakness. Justice is easily corrupted. Trials are conducted with a disturbing lack of fairness. Harry's disciplinary hearing in Order of the Phoenix is scheduled without proper notice, placed in a chamber meant for high-profile trials, and presided over by Fudge himself. The sheer intimidation of the setting demonstrates how the Ministry bends law to serve its agenda. Instead of impartial judgment, we see a predetermined attempt to discredit a teenager. This scene forces readers to question how many other cases in wizarding history were manipulated and how many innocent witches and wizards suffered under biased decisions. Behind the inefficiency lies an even more disturbing truth. No one truly controls the Ministry. While the minister appears to lead, influence is scattered across wealthy families, entrenched bureaucrats, and shadowy interests. Characters like Dolores Umbridge rise not because of competence, but because of blind loyalty. Figures like Lucius Malfoy gain more power through donations and connections than any official election. Even the Department of Mysteries, with its cryptic experiments on time, death, and prophecy, operates outside public scrutiny. The result is a government that is powerful in image, yet hollow in substance. When Voldemort finally chooses to take control, the Ministry collapses within days, suggesting it was never stable to begin with. The refusal to recognize Voldemort's return is perhaps the Ministry's greatest crime. From the end of Goblet of Fire onward, every sign points to danger: Cedric Diggory's death, the gathering of Death Eaters, the reappearance of the Dark Mark. Yet Fudge's paranoia blinds him. By branding Harry a liar and Dumbledore a manipulator, he wastes precious time that could have been used to prepare. The smear campaign against Harry in the Daily Prophet is a striking demonstration of this. Rather than inform citizens, the Ministry prefers to control the narrative. A government that values denial over truth cannot protect its people, and Rowling uses this to show how fear of losing face can lead to national disaster. Leadership after Fudge reveals the same instability. Rufus Scrimgeour, though braver and more pragmatic, still demonstrates a flawed approach. He seeks to use Harry as a symbol of Ministry strength, not as a partner in the fight against Voldemort. Harry's refusal to be manipulated shows how little trust exists between the youth who represent the future and the government that claims to protect them. The tragic murder of Scrimgeour during Voldemort's rise is another reminder that the Ministry is incapable of standing firm when true power challenges it. It collapses not because of lack of resources, but because of lack of unity and integrity. The theatre of the Ministry is perhaps best represented in its propaganda. Posters declaring undesirable number 1 with Harry's face, pamphlets urging witches and wizards to spy on each other, and Umbridge's grotesque proclamations create an atmosphere of paranoia. Instead of stability, the Ministry produces fear. Citizens are encouraged to distrust their neighbours, and loyalty is demanded at the expense of truth. It mirrors totalitarian regimes of the Muggle world, suggesting that the wizarding government is not immune to the same human flaws of control and fear-mongering. For all its faults, the Ministry also provides an ironic lesson. Power without accountability is meaningless. Though it claims authority, though it has resources, buildings, and countless employees, the Ministry achieves very little in practice. It fails to prevent Voldemort's rise, fails to protect children, fails to offer justice. The true resistance comes not from its endless departments, but from a secret society, the Order of the Phoenix, operating outside the government. It is Dumbledore, McGonagall, and ordinary witches and wizards who truly resist evil, while the Ministry oscillates between denial and surrender. In this contrast lies Rowling's message. Institutions may appear grand, but real courage often exists in those who stand apart from them. The strangeness of the Ministry of Magic is not that it exists as a government, but that it functions so poorly that one wonders how the wizarding world survives under it. In theory, the Ministry should be the protector of all magical citizens, the guardian of order, the defender against dark forces. In practice, it is a fragile stage where leaders fear their seats more than they fear the enemy, where bureaucracy suffocates action, and where truth is manipulated to maintain illusions. The question who runs the Ministry has only one unsettling answer. No one truly does, and that is perhaps the strangest detail of all. Number 17, magical medicine. Miracle or illusion? Of all the wonders of the wizarding world, magical medicine remains one of the most fascinating and baffling. Readers first encounter its extraordinary potential in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry breaks his arm during a Quidditch match and the incompetent Gilderoy Lockhart manages to remove all the bones instead of repairing the fracture. What seems like a disaster is handled with astonishing nonchalance. Madame Pomfrey, the school's matron, assures Harry that his bones can be regrown overnight with the help of Skele Grow. Rowling describes the scene vividly. It was the most unpleasant night of Harry's life. Regrowing bones is a nasty business. The potion burned in his mouth and made his arm feel like it was full of molten lead. And yet, by the next morning, his arm was whole again. For a reader, this raises an immediate and disturbing question. If bones can be regenerated overnight, why do witches and wizards still struggle with illnesses and curses that would seem far simpler to heal? The medical achievements of the magical world are dazzling at first glance. A burn that would leave a muggle scarred for life can be reversed in hours with a proper potion. Poisonings, such as Ron Weasley's near-fatal brush with mead laced with poison in The Half-Blood Prince, can be treated swiftly by a skilled hand like Horace Slughorn's, who shoves a bezoar down Ron's throat and saves his life. Madame Pomfrey can mend broken noses, cure dangerous infections, and return students to health at a pace that would make any muggle doctor weep with envy. The hospital wing at Hogwarts often resembles a miracle factory, with beds filling and emptying almost as quickly as patients stumble in. But once one looks deeper, cracks begin to appear in this apparently perfect system. The first strangeness lies in the persistence of ancient magical diseases. Dragonpox, a highly contagious illness, remains one of the great terrors of the wizarding world. Even Albus Dumbledore's mother is rumoured to have contracted it, and several characters mention it in hushed tones. Despite centuries of magical research, no universal cure has been found. This is not a world free from epidemics. On the contrary, it appears that wizards live in constant fear of maladies that their supposedly advanced medical arts cannot conquer. A broken bone can be repaired in hours, but a disease that spreads slowly through the body resists every known potion and charm. The paradox is glaring. The miraculous speed of bone regrowth, contrasted with the hopeless struggle against dragonpox, makes one wonder whether magical medicine has blind spots so large that even the most brilliant healers cannot cross them. Another example lies in the horrifying permanence of certain curses. The Cruciatus curse inflicts unimaginable pain, but it is the after-effects of sustained exposure that devastate lives. Alice and Frank Longbottom, tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange and her fellow Death Eaters, remain patients in St. Mungo's Hospital years later. Neville visits them, bringing sweets, but their minds are shattered beyond repair. If wizards can regrow bones, why can't they restore damaged minds? Why does the wizarding world, with all its miracle potions and restorative charms, accept with resignation that some magical injuries are incurable? The very existence of a hospital like St. Mungo's, with entire wards dedicated to spell damage, suggests the limits of magical medicine are far greater than one might assume from Harry's overnight recovery in his second year. The narrative offers further contradictions. In the Goblet of Fire, Harry faces a cut from the Hungarian horntail's spiked tail, an injury deep and bleeding. The wound requires several days to heal fully, despite the application of ointments and charms. Yet in another scene, Hermione shrinks her teeth back to normal size after a disastrous hex from Draco Malfoy, showing that even physical alterations can be reversed almost instantly. Why is one injury simple and another stubborn? The inconsistency implies that the magical world does not operate under the universal laws of science, but under rules more arbitrary, where some afflictions are inexplicably resistant to intervention. Part of this enigma may stem from the difference between what is natural and what is cursed. Madame Pomfrey excels at restoring the body's natural state. Bones, skin, organs, even teeth can be nudged back into their proper form. But when magic itself rewrites the body, as with cursed scars or the lingering damage of dark spells, the results are far less predictable. Harry's lightning scar, the most famous mark in wizarding literature, never fades, never heals, and often torments him with pain. Even Dumbledore admits that there is nothing anyone can do to remove it. The permanence of the scar reveals something chilling. The magic of destruction often outweighs the magic of healing. Wizards may have devised ways to repair the natural body, but they cannot undo the deepest fingerprints of dark sorcery. The case of Skeely Grow remains the most striking example of the wonders and horrors of magical medicine. When Harry endures the excruciating process of regrowing bones, the narrative insists on the pain, the nightmares, the sense of molten fire running through his arm. Through the night, bones were regrowing, Rowling writes, but Harry would never forget the feeling. It is not an effortless miracle. It is an ordeal that taxes the patient's endurance. Healing in this world often comes at a cost. Unlike Muggle medicine, where recovery may be slow but tolerable, wizarding cures often involve suffering compressed into a shorter span of time. In this way, magical medicine mirrors its society. Solutions are dazzling but dangerous, leaving scars of memory if not of flesh. This strange mixture of progress and failure extends into the field of potions. The Wolfsbane potion, invented by Damocles Belby, allows werewolves like Remus Lupin to retain their human minds during transformation. This is an extraordinary achievement, reducing what was once a life-destroying curse into something manageable. Yet even this potion is not a cure. Lupin remains a werewolf, bound to the cycles of the moon, and requires constant vigilance to prepare the potion. A single missed dose means catastrophe. Here again, wizarding medicine proves itself capable of alleviation, but not eradication. Illnesses and curses can be managed, controlled, or temporarily soothed, but the underlying condition remains as immovable as the walls of Hogwarts itself. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries reveals this paradox in its very design. The wards are divided by types of magical injury: spell damage, creature-induced injuries, potions and plant poisoning, and so on. Patients wander through its corridors with bizarre afflictions, tentacles sprouting from ears, boils that sing, minds addled beyond repair. Healers do their best, but some patients never leave. Gilderoy Lockhart himself becomes a permanent resident after a memory charm backfires, leaving him permanently damaged. Even the most advanced magical healers cannot restore what has been lost in his case. The image of Lockhart smiling vaguely as he signs photographs he no longer remembers taking stands as a sobering reminder that magic cannot conquer everything. When Voldemort returns to power, the failures of magical medicine become more visible. The killing curse of Avada Kedavra strikes without leaving a wound. It is unhealable, unanswerable, absolute. Wizards who can regrow bones and cure poison in moments are utterly helpless against this one spell. The most feared curse in the magical world is feared precisely because it admits no antidote. This fact creates a strange inequality. A wizard might survive a basilisk's venom thanks to Phoenix tears, as Harry does in the Chamber of Secrets, but no one can survive the killing curse without the shield of sacrificial love, a force more ancient than any potion. The greatest medical challenge in the wizarding world remains untouched. Hanging like a shadow over every duel and every war, the resilience of magical epidemics is another troubling dimension. Dragon pox continues to plague families, leaving green pustules and violent coughing fits. Elders are especially vulnerable. The disease seems almost medieval compared to the otherwise advanced state of magical treatment. Families like the Blacks record dragon pox as a common cause of death, despite centuries of magical development. The persistence of such diseases implies a stagnant medical culture where research and innovation are slower than expected. Perhaps the wizarding world's reliance on tradition and secrecy prevents the same scientific rigor that drives Muggle medicine forward. Indeed, one must consider the cultural factors shaping magical medicine. Wizards distrust Muggle practices, often mocking them as primitive. Yet Muggles continue to push the boundaries of biology, surgery, and chemistry, while wizards seem content with the remedies passed down through generations. Madame Pomfrey does not invent new potions, she applies ancient recipes. St. Mungo's does not publish medical journals, it preserves knowledge through oral tradition and apprenticeship. This conservatism may explain why wizarding medicine shines in certain miraculous feats but lags behind in systematic cures. The culture of secrecy, the disdain for Muggle science, and the dependence on established spells combine to create a field both brilliant and limited. The irony of magical healing is that it depends heavily on individual skill. A careless teacher like Lockhart can do more harm than good. A master like Snape, brewing antidotes and protective drafts, can save lives. The variability is immense. Where Muggle hospitals strive for standardized procedures, wizarding care relies on the genius or failure of single practitioners. One healer might save a life, another might doom it. This reliance on talent over structure explains why miraculous rescues coexist with tragic failures. Harry survives poison thanks to Slughorn's quick thinking, but how many less fortunate wizards perish because no one nearby remembers the right charm or potion? Ultimately, the strangeness of wizarding medicine lies in its very duality. On one hand, it achieves feats that Muggle doctors can only dream of: bone regrowth, instant detoxification, scarless healing. On the other, it fails catastrophically where one would least expect. A broken mind cannot be restored, a dark curse cannot be lifted, a deadly spell cannot be reversed. The world Rowling constructs is not one of medical perfection, but of strange priorities where visible injuries vanish overnight, but invisible wounds linger for a lifetime. The paradox is deliberate, for it reminds us that even in a land of miracles, vulnerability remains. Harry's arm, restored by mourning, and Harry's scar, burning forever, form the two poles of this peculiar truth. Magical medicine is both a wonder and an illusion, a dazzling spectacle hiding profound limits. Number 18. Muggle-borns and discrimination. The magical world of Harry Potter is filled with wonders, enchanted castles, bewitched objects, and creatures that defy explanation. Yet beneath the charm lies a shadow of injustice that cannot be ignored. The treatment of Muggle-born witches and wizards remains one of the strangest contradictions in the wizarding world, a society that prides itself on knowledge and power, a society where wands flicker with endless possibilities, still clings to an archaic prejudice. The very existence of magic in those born to non-magical families is a miracle, but instead of admiration, it is too often met with contempt. This paradox defines much of the undercurrent in Harry Potter's story, and nowhere is it clearer than in the lives of those called, with venom and hatred, mudbloods. The insult itself is searing, and the books do not shy away from showing its cruelty. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Draco Malfoy sneers at Hermione Granger. "Your mother's a mudblood. You are too." The sting of that word lingers not only in Hermione's shocked silence, but in the way the Gryffindor common room responds afterward, filled with anger and horror. Ron Weasley's fury leads him to attempt a spell only to see it backfire in comic disaster, but the comedy does nothing to erase the darkness of the insult. Rowling carefully illustrates that this is no mere schoolyard taunt. It is a deeply rooted slur, heavy with centuries of hatred, a symbol of how the wizarding world treats those who, through no fault of their own, are deemed impure. Hermione Granger stands as the most visible face of this discrimination. Brilliant, disciplined, and consistently the top of her class, she dismantles the very argument against Muggle-born competence with every exam and every daring decision. Yet despite her brilliance, she is marked as inferior in the eyes of those obsessed with bloodlines. In the dueling club, Malfoy throws the insult in front of an audience, knowing its impact will echo across the school. Hermione herself does not flinch with tears, but carries the wound silently, channeling the disdain into greater determination. She becomes a symbol of resilience, yet it is telling that she must constantly fight not only dark wizards, but the prejudice embedded in the very culture of Hogwarts and beyond. The Ministry of Magic, a body that should protect all its citizens, consistently fails Muggle-born witches and wizards. Its actions range from indifference to outright hostility. During Voldemort's rise in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Ministry falls under the Death Eater's control and establishes the Muggle-born Registration Commission. Dolores Umbridge, already infamous for her cruelty, becomes the head of this department, interrogating Muggle-borns under the false assumption that they have stolen magic. The trials are shameless theatre, designed to humiliate and strip rights away. This institutionalized persecution is not a surprise, but a natural extension of a prejudice long ignored. The seeds were always there. Voldemort merely nurtured them into full bloom. History shows that the wizarding world has long been complicit in this hierarchy. The obsession with pure-blood families, detailed through the Black family tapestry, reveals centuries of disdain for those who dared taint the line with Muggle or Muggle-born connections. The Malfoys, with their wealth and polished manners, represent this ideology in the present. Lucius Malfoy's influence within the Ministry demonstrates how deep these beliefs run. When laws and policies are shaped by families who proudly erase names from their own genealogies, is it any wonder that Muggle-borns remain vulnerable? The Pike. Ministry's silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. The cruelty of the slur mudblood is magnified by the strange irony that half of wizarding Britain likely has Muggle ancestry somewhere in its past. Witches and wizards marry into non-magical families over generations. Squibs, born without magic, are reminders that bloodlines are fragile and inconsistent. Even Voldemort himself, who built his entire ideology on purity, was the son of a witch and a muggle man. This hypocrisy forms the beating heart of the wizarding world's prejudice. It is not rational, it is not scientific, it is fear masquerading as superiority. The very individuals who sneer at muggle-borns are, in many ways, rejecting pieces of themselves. This contradiction is perhaps best embodied in the character of Severus Snape. Born to a witch mother and a muggle father, Snape grows up in a broken, bitter household. His early life is coloured by humiliation, not unlike what muggle-born children might feel when faced with the scorn of pureblood supremacists. Yet, as he grows older, he aligns himself with the Death Eaters, joining a movement obsessed with blood purity. In Snape, we see how internalized shame can twist into cruelty. He spits the word mudblood at Lily Evans, the very friend who once brought warmth into his bleak life. The insult severs their bond forever, reminding us that this slur carries the power not only to wound, but to destroy. The psychological weight of such prejudice cannot be understated. For Muggle-born students, every insult is a reminder that no achievement will ever be enough. Hermione's perfect scores, her resourcefulness, and her bravery in the face of danger earn her admiration from allies, but they do not shield her from the hatred of others. The word mudblood is a constant reminder that she does not truly belong, at least in the eyes of many. This creates an undercurrent of tension in the very halls of Hogwarts, a school supposedly dedicated to nurturing young magical talent. The castle walls are ancient, but the prejudice they contain is older still. Rowling provides moments where the hatred becomes physical, not just verbal. In Chamber of Secrets, the heir of Slytherin targets Muggle-born students with the basilisk. Filch's cat, Justin Finch-Fletchley, Colin Creevey, all chosen because of their heritage, all frozen as victims of a prejudice weaponized by dark magic. The message is chilling. In the wrong hands, hatred becomes lethal. What begins as a sneer in a corridor can transform into a war against entire families. The chamber's opening is not merely a plot device, it is a grim reminder that the wizarding world's disdain for Muggle-borns is not abstract. It kills. There is also a generational divide in how this prejudice is perpetuated. Ron Weasley, despite his loving family, initially absorbs some of the rhetoric around blood status. His disgust when he hears the slur mudblood is genuine, but his occasional comments reveal traces of ingrained prejudice. Over time, his friendship with Hermione challenges these unconscious biases. This shows how change is possible, but it requires confrontation and discomfort. On the other side, Draco Malfoy embodies the perpetuation of old beliefs. He parrots his father's venom, but as the series progresses, it becomes clear that Draco himself is a boy trapped by family expectations, a symbol of how prejudice is taught, not born. The hypocrisy of the wizarding world is also visible in its dependence on muggles. Wizards may sneer at non-magical people, but they rely on muggle inventions in countless ways. Arthur Weasley's fascination with plugs and telephones underscores that muggle ingenuity often outpaces magical convenience. And yet, while admiration might exist in private, in public it is cloaked in disdain. The cognitive dissonance is striking. A world that fears and despises muggles cannot help but be fascinated by them. Against this backdrop, the persecution of muggle-borns becomes even more absurd. They are living proof that magic can flourish anywhere, and instead of celebrating this, the society clings to divisions. Voldemort's reign of terror lays bare the consequences of unchecked prejudice. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was not an isolated horror, but the inevitable conclusion of centuries of quiet discrimination. Those with power, like Cornelius Fudge, had ignored the growing threat, believing that denial was safer than confrontation. By the time Umbridge sat smugly in her pink office, demanding proof of magical lineage, the danger had matured into state policy. The courtroom scenes, with frightened Muggleborns accused of theft for simply existing, illustrate how quickly prejudice turns into persecution when authority refuses to intervene. What makes this prejudice so strange, even unbelievable, is that it persists in a society constantly under threat. The wizarding world faces dangers that demand unity: dark lords, giants, dementors, and more. Yet even in moments of crisis, wizards fracture along the lines of blood purity. The Second Wizarding War shows how costly this division can be. While Harry, Hermione, and Ron fight for survival, the Ministry remains riddled with individuals who would rather uphold old prejudices than embrace solidarity. The world almost collapses not only because of Voldemort's power, but because of its own unwillingness to abandon hate. One cannot overlook the irony that love and loyalty consistently triumph over blood. Lily Evans, a Muggle-born, saves her son with a sacrifice so powerful that even Voldemort's killing curse rebounds. Hermione Granger, the so-called mudblood, becomes indispensable to Harry's victories, guiding him through dangers with her intellect and courage. The victories of the wizarding world are built not by the pride of purebloods, but by the strength of those scorned. And yet, long after Voldemort's fall, the question remains: will the wizarding world ever confront its own hypocrisy, or will it quietly allow the poison of blood prejudice to linger? The contradiction remains one of the strangest truths in Harry Potter's universe, a world where half its citizens share Muggle ancestry, yet discrimination thrives. The wizarding world can conjure light from darkness, transform objects into animals, and fly on broomsticks, but it struggles to rid itself of hate. In the end, the word mudblood is not just a slur, it is a mirror reflecting a society too often blind to its own contradictions, and a reminder that magic alone cannot erase the prejudices of the heart. Number 19. Why wasn't Hogwarts closed? Of all the mysteries in J.K. Rowling's world, one of the most perplexing questions has nothing to do with the mechanics of magic or the hidden corners of wizarding history. It is instead the strange endurance of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a place that over the course of 7 years in Harry Potter's life became the stage for a series of catastrophes that would have shut down any normal institution for good. A troll in the girls' bathroom, a basilisk slithering through the plumbing, dementors on the grounds, and Voldemort himself rising again within the castle walls. These are not minor incidents. In the Muggle world, a single accident could be enough to prompt investigations, lawsuits, and indefinite closures. Yet somehow Hogwarts remained open, as if a near-constant threat to children's lives was a simple matter of routine. The contrast is striking and deeply unsettling, and it forces readers to confront the odd cultural tolerance for danger in the wizarding world. The first year alone should have raised enough alarm to draw the Ministry of Magic into immediate action. An 11-year-old student was nearly killed when a mountain troll was let into the castle during Halloween. The creature wandered freely into the girls' bathroom where Hermione Granger was cornered, and it was only Harry and Ron's reckless bravery that prevented a tragedy. The incident proved beyond doubt that Hogwarts's defences could be breached, and that children were not safe. Yet after the chaos was resolved, life simply went on. Students returned to lessons as if a murderous troll in the corridors was part of their educational experience. In a Muggle school, parents would have demanded accountability, newspapers would have cried scandal, and administrators would have faced consequences. In Hogwarts, it was shrugged off as an unfortunate event. The following year, the situation escalated from dangerous to horrifying. The Chamber of Secrets was opened, and one by one students were found petrified, their bodies frozen in terror by a creature no one could identify. Whispers spread of a monster lurking in the castle, and fear took over the school. The school might have to be closed, Professor McGonagall admitted in Harry Potter, and the Chamber of Secrets acknowledging that the safety of students had been stretched beyond reason. Ginny Weasley was kidnapped and nearly killed in the depths of the chamber, and the truth later revealed that a basilisk, a deadly serpent whose gaze can kill instantly, had been roaming the pipes and emerging through the castle's walls. How was it possible that a centuries-old institution supposedly dedicated to the welfare of young witches and wizards allowed its students to remain in such peril? Yet after Harry slew the basilisk and Dumbledore returned, the idea of closure vanished once more, as though the near massacre of children had simply been another chapter in the school's long, troubled history. By the third year, the threats came not from within but from without. Dementors, creatures that feed on human happiness and leave their victims in despair, were stationed around the castle by order of the Ministry. These beings are so dangerous that fully trained wizards struggle to repel them with the Patronus charm, and yet they were placed within striking distance of hundreds of children. On the Hogwarts Express, a Dementor entered the compartment where Harry, Hermione, and Ron sat, nearly killing Harry in the process. The school accepted their presence with talk of precautions, but the image of soul-sucking monsters hovering over the castle grounds should have been enough to terrify any parent. Still, the school continued its lessons, as if the looming risk of students losing their souls was simply another obstacle to education. The fourth year brought the Triwizard Tournament, an event so deadly that it had been discontinued for centuries due to the number of deaths it caused. When Dumbledore announced its revival, the audience is left to wonder why a school filled with children was thought to be an appropriate place for such a blood-soaked tradition. Cedric Diggory's murder at the hands of Voldemort was the ultimate confirmation that Hogwarts was not a fortress but a magnet for death. Yet even this tragedy did not close the school. Students returned once again, grief hidden behind the insistence that the tournament had been a special case, a terrible accident rather than a sign of deeper recklessness. The fifth year revealed perhaps the strangest contradiction of all. The Ministry of Magic itself infiltrated Hogwarts through Dolores Umbridge, transforming the school into a battleground between authoritarian bureaucracy and youthful rebellion. Students were tortured, beaten, and silenced. Harry was forced to carve the words, "I must not tell lies," into his skin with a cursed quill under Umbridge's command. Still, Hogwarts remained open, a functioning institution, even while its leaders failed to protect children from cruelty. When the inquisitorial squad roamed the halls, and the defense against the dark arts class was reduced to meaningless theory, the very purpose of Hogwarts had been undermined. Yet parents, the ministry, and even the wizarding public seemed to tolerate the chaos as a normal part of the school year. In the sixth year, the danger escalated further. Draco Malfoy, under orders from Voldemort, smuggled Death Eaters into the castle through the Vanishing Cabinet. The result was a full-scale battle within Hogwarts walls. Professors, students, and Death Eaters clashed in corridors, and Albus Dumbledore was murdered at the top of the Astronomy Tower. This was not simply a breach of security, but the collapse of any illusion that Hogwarts was safe. A terrorist organization had penetrated the most secure school in the wizarding world, assassinated its headmaster, and fled without consequence. Still, Hogwarts opened again, as though nothing short of total destruction could halt its function. Finally came the seventh year, when Voldemort openly seized control. Severus Snape was made headmaster, and Death Eaters roamed the corridors, punishing students with whips and the Cruciatus Curse. Children who resisted were tortured, and others were executed for defiance. Hogwarts had transformed from a school into a prison camp. The Battle of Hogwarts turned it into a war zone, with giants, acromantulas, and Voldemort himself rampaging through its halls. Scores of students died, yet this very site of horror later returned to normalcy, as though the trauma could be erased with new walls and new lessons. The resilience is admirable, but the logic is bizarre. The strangeness lies not only in the events themselves, but in the passivity of the wizarding community. Parents who must have heard rumors of basilisk attacks or Dementor infestations still sent their children back each September. Molly and Arthur Weasley, who loved their children dearly, allowed Ron and Ginny to return even after Ginny's near death in the Chamber of Secrets. Neville Longbottom's grandmother, who had already lost her son and daughter-in-law to the madness of Death Eaters, continued to entrust her grandson to a castle that was repeatedly targeted by Voldemort. It is as though the magical community accepted danger as a natural part of education, a cultural blind spot that valued tradition over safety. One might argue that Hogwarts, unlike Muggle schools, was uniquely equipped to handle danger. Professors like McGonagall and Flitwick were skilled duelists, and spells offered forms of protection unknown to the non-magical world. Yet the evidence shows again and again that these defenses were not enough. Professors failed to stop the basilisk, to control the Dementors, or to prevent Death Eaters from infiltrating the grounds. The repeated assurances of special measures proved hollow, exposing students to mortal danger year after year. The illusion of control was maintained, but the reality was chaos. The core of this puzzle lies perhaps in the wizarding worldview itself. The magical community is steeped in tradition and resistant to change. Hogwarts is not just a school. It is a symbol, a cultural pillar that predates many modern institutions. To close it, even temporarily, would mean admitting weakness and undermining centuries of pride. It is easier to maintain the pretense of resilience than to confront the reality of failure. Dumbledore's influence also cannot be ignored. His reputation as the greatest wizard of his age reassured both parents and ministry officials, even when he himself admitted the school faced catastrophic risks. The faith placed in his wisdom may have silenced protests and allowed Hogwarts to survive scandals that would have destroyed any lesser institution. Still, the dissonance remains. The school might have to be closed, McGonagall said in the Chamber of Secrets, but it never was. The basilisk was slain, the petrified were revived, and the school marched forward unchanged. Again and again, catastrophe was followed by continuity and danger by denial. Hogwarts endured because it was too deeply rooted in wizarding culture to be abandoned, but that endurance reveals more about the wizarding world's strange tolerance for peril than about the actual safety of the school itself. In the end, the question of why Hogwarts never closed is not answered by practicalities, but by the cultural logic of Rowling's world. The wizarding community accepts risk as part of life, believes in tradition above all, and trusts figures of authority to a fault. Children actually died, and still the school continued. To a Muggle observer, the strangeness is glaring, almost absurd. Yet within the magical world, it is precisely this dangerous resilience that defines Hogwarts, not as a safe haven, but as a crucible where danger is inevitable and survival is part of the education. Number 20, Magic and Age, Strange Rules. Magic in the wizarding world has always been portrayed as a force governed by laws, traditions, and invisible boundaries that often make little sense to the reader. Among the strangest rules, none is more puzzling than the Ministry of Magic's restrictions on underage sorcery. Until a wizard or witch turns 17, they are forbidden to perform spells outside school, as if magic itself were too dangerous to be trusted in young hands. Yet, what appears to be a strict law quickly reveals cracks when examined through Harry Potter's life, where unfair treatment and contradictions turn the law into a tool of confusion rather than order. The clearest example comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Harry had just returned to Privet Drive after his first year at Hogwarts. He was already suffering the cruelty of the Dursleys when an unexpected visitor, Dobby the house elf, appeared in his bedroom. Desperate to prevent Harry from returning to school, Dobby used his own magic to levitate a pudding in the Dursleys' kitchen and crash it onto the floor. The disaster humiliated the Dursleys in front of their guests. Yet before the house elf could vanish, an owl from the Ministry of Magic arrived with a severe warning addressed to Harry. The letter declared, "Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school, and further spell work on your part may lead to expulsion from Hogwarts." The implication was clear. Harry was considered guilty of a magical offense he had not even committed. This situation highlights one of the most frustrating flaws in the Ministry's system. If the Ministry truly monitored magic performed by underage wizards, How could they fail to recognize that the spell was not cast by Harry at all? They did not investigate further, nor did they attempt to identify the source of the magic. Instead, they assumed the boy was guilty, leaving him with the unbearable fear of being expelled from the only place he considered home. The absurdity lies in the fact that Dobby, a non-human creature, performed the spell, but the Ministry's surveillance could not distinguish between elf magic and wizard magic. The rules were designed to be strict, but the enforcement was careless and blind. This blind enforcement becomes even stranger when compared with the lives of other young witches and wizards. Consider Ron Weasley and his siblings who grew up surrounded by magic in the Burrow. It is inconceivable to imagine that Fred and George Weasley, notorious pranksters from a magical family, refrained from practicing spells at home before turning 17. Their entire household pulsed with enchantments, from the self-washing pans to the garden gnomes Ron had to de-gnome as a child. Did the Ministry truly believe the Burrow remained silent of all underage magic? Or perhaps more disturbingly, the Ministry simply looked the other way when magic occurred in families already steeped in the wizarding world, only punishing those like Harry, who lived among muggles and could easily be singled out. The letter Harry received in the Chamber of Secrets stands as a chilling example of how arbitrary the law was. Harry had no wand in hand, no intention to cast a spell, and yet the Ministry accused him with words sharp as a blade. You have received an official warning for a serious breach of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. There is a cruel irony in the fact that the government did not even pause to question the event. Harry was guilty simply because he lived at Privet Drive, alone and without magical guardians. It did not matter that the spell was cast by an entirely different being. This inequality of treatment reveals a deeper injustice. The system was not designed to protect children, but to control them, often at the expense of those most vulnerable. A child like Ron, surrounded by his magical parents and brothers, could be shielded from suspicion. Any charm or hex performed in his home might easily be attributed to his older siblings. By contrast, Harry, living with muggles, had no such protection. Every flicker of magic detected in his home became his burden. Thus, the law punished him for his environment, not for his actions. It is a haunting reminder that the Ministry's methods were not only flawed, but deeply unjust. The flaws of the trace, the enchantment that supposedly tracked underage magic, are revealed again in later books. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore explained to Harry that the Ministry could detect magic around young witches and wizards but not identify the exact caster. This meant that when a spell was performed in the presence of adults, the Ministry assumed responsibility lay with them. But in Harry's case, surrounded by muggles incapable of magic, any spell became his crime by default. Dumbledore himself admitted that this loophole often worked against children like Harry, proving the law was less about fairness and more about assumption. The contradiction grows when we remember the incident in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry accidentally inflated Aunt Marge. This time, he had indeed lost control and performed real magic in a fit of anger. But instead of expelling him immediately, the Ministry seemed to change its tune. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, met Harry at the Leaky Cauldron and brushed the event aside with suspicious leniency, claiming, "Accidental magic happens when a wizard is angry or scared." The same Ministry that threatened him with expulsion for Dobby's pudding now excused him for a far more serious transgression. The rules were the same, yet the enforcement was wildly inconsistent. What becomes clear is that the Ministry applied its laws not with logic, but with convenience. When punishing Harry served their authority, they did so without mercy. When forgiving him suited their needs, particularly when Sirius Black's escape made Harry too valuable to lose, they turned a blind eye. The rules on underage magic, then, were not rules at all, but weapons, wielded selectively against those who could not defend themselves. The Ministry's authority relied on intimidation rather than justice, and Harry became the perfect target. This selective enforcement also raises a troubling question. What was the true purpose of forbidding underage sorcery? Was it truly about safety, or was it about control? Young witches and wizards, especially those from Muggle families, entered the wizarding world already at a disadvantage. By forbidding them to practice outside Hogwarts, the Ministry ensured their dependence on the institution and suppressed their growth. Children from magical families, however, often found ways around the rule, learning from parents and siblings in environments impossible to monitor. Once again, the law served to protect privilege rather than equality. The injustice is further magnified when we consider Hermione Granger. A Muggle-born witch, Hermione obeyed the rules scrupulously, refraining from magic during summers. Her strict discipline gave her a reputation for responsibility, but it also exposed how much harder she had to work compared to peers from magical families. While Fred and George experimented with joke products in their bedroom long before opening Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, Hermione had no such luxury. Her loyalty to the law became a burden, binding her more than others who ignored the rules without consequence. The Ministry's enforcement thus created invisible divides, rewarding some while punishing others. The system also ignored the dangers faced by young witches and wizards in real life. Harry's summers at Privet Drive were filled with neglect, emotional abuse, and isolation. A boy in such circumstances could have needed magic for protection or comfort. Yet the Ministry's decree left him defenseless, banning even the smallest charm that could ease his suffering. In the eyes of the law, Harry's security was less important than the appearance of discipline. The hypocrisy is painful. The Ministry demanded obedience from children while failing to protect them from cruelty. One cannot help but see the absurdity in comparing Harry's punishment to the lack of accountability for other young wizards. Draco Malfoy, pampered by his wealthy family, never appeared to fear reprimand for practicing magic at home. The Malfoys' influence in the Ministry likely shielded him from scrutiny. Meanwhile, Harry, without parents, guardians, or political power, bore the full weight of every accusation. The Ministry's rules became not only about age, but about status, creating a hidden hierarchy of who could bend the rules and who could not. The greatest irony, perhaps, is that the Ministry expected children to master their powers at school while forbidding them to practice outside it. How does one become skilled in magic if practice is restricted to 9 months of the year? Wizards like Harry, Hermione, and Neville were forced to rely solely on lessons, while children with magical families enjoyed practice year-round. This contradiction reveals the law's hidden bias. It claimed to preserve order, but in truth preserved inequality. The story of Harry and the pudding in the Chamber of Secrets remains one of the most telling examples of this hypocrisy. It was not merely a warning about underage magic, it was a declaration that the Ministry did not care for truth, only for control. The letter he received was a symbol of an authority willing to sacrifice fairness to maintain its illusion of power. And though Harry continued to face greater injustices throughout the series, this moment foreshadowed the broken system he would one day fight against. When we examine the rules of underage sorcery in the wizarding world, the strangeness becomes undeniable. The Ministry demanded obedience but enforced its rules selectively, punishing the vulnerable while excusing the privileged. It was a system riddled with contradictions, unable to distinguish who performed magic, unwilling to acknowledge its flaws, and incapable of treating all children equally. In this contradiction lies one of the strangest truths of the Harry Potter universe, that magic itself was less mysterious than the laws created to govern it. Number 21. Magical creatures, threat or decoration. Of all the mysteries that define the wizarding world, none feels stranger than the way magical creatures are treated. Wizards coexist with beings of staggering intelligence and terrifying power, yet the line between respect and disdain is drawn haphazardly, as if convenience is the only true law. This contradiction becomes glaring when one considers the case of goblins. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, J.K. Rowling notes, "Goblins don't trust wizards, but it is they who run Gringotts." Here lies the paradox. Creatures officially seen as lesser beings are entrusted with the financial backbone of Wizarding Britain. Wizards will not sit down to dinner with goblins, yet they trust them to guard their fortunes and family legacies. This contradiction runs deep, for if goblins are intelligent and trustworthy enough to manage gold, why are they denied political representation, wands, or equal rights? The hypocrisy becomes clearer when contrasted with how other magical beings are treated. Centaurs, creatures of immense wisdom and skilled in divination, are relegated to the margins of society. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Firenze tells Harry that his herd resents him for helping humans, for they believe their destiny is not to serve. The Ministry of Magic categorizes centaurs as beasts, despite their clear intelligence. Wizards admire their knowledge when it is useful, yet quickly label them dangerous or primitive when they resist subjugation. This duality underscores an uncomfortable truth. The Wizarding world is built on prejudice, where magical beings are classified not by their nature, but by whether they can be controlled. Nowhere is this prejudice more brutal than in the fate of giants. Once a thriving people, they were driven nearly to extinction by centuries of wizard hostility. Hagrid explains to Harry in Goblet of Fire that giants were hunted because they were feared, and by the 1990s only a few dozen remained, hidden in remote mountain valleys. Wizards justified this destruction as necessary, portraying giants as too violent and destructive to coexist peacefully. Yet one cannot help but notice the selective logic. If danger is the measure, why were dragons equally deadly not exterminated? The answer is simple. Dragons were valuable as sources of materials, scales, blood, and heartstrings for wands, while giants offered no such economic utility. Thus, one group was destroyed while another was preserved, their value decided entirely by wizarding needs. Werewolves, meanwhile, suffered a different form of persecution. Unlike centaurs or giants, they were once human, transformed by a bite into a cursed existence. The wizarding community treated them as outcasts, refusing employment and pushing them into the shadows. Remus Lupin's story makes this injustice personal. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he reveals how difficult life was. Parents didn't want a werewolf teaching their children. Despite his brilliance as a defense against the dark arts professor, prejudice cost him his position. Wizards feared his nature more than they valued his knowledge. Lupin's life is proof that the stigma of being a magical creature, or even partially one, destroys opportunities, leaving individuals to suffer not because of their actions, but because of what they are. The inconsistency is even starker when one considers house elves. Unlike goblins, centaurs, or werewolves, elves are bound into servitude. Wizards justify this by claiming that elves like to serve. In Chamber of Secrets, Dobby says, "Dobby is used to death threats, sir. Dobby gets them 5 times a day at home." The casual cruelty directed at elves goes unnoticed, normalized to the point that Hermione's campaign for their freedom in Goblet of Fire is treated as laughable. And yet elves are powerful beings, capable of magic beyond the reach of most wizards. Dobby disapparates inside Hogwarts, something even Dumbledore cannot do. Despite this, their agency is denied because their magic is inconveniently unpredictable, their servitude too comfortable for wizards to question. Again the pattern emerges. Magical beings are valued when they serve, feared when they resist, and erased when they cannot be controlled. Goblins, however, stand apart because of their economic importance. They remain both indispensable and distrusted, a paradox woven throughout wizarding society. Bill Weasley, who works as a cursebreaker for Gringotts, often describes how difficult it is to earn their trust. Their cultural traditions differ from those of wizards, particularly regarding ownership. Goblins believe that the maker of an object retains ownership, while wizards view a purchased item as theirs forever. This conflict reaches a climax in Deathly Hallows when Griphook insists that the sword of Gryffindor belongs to goblins, not wizards, because goblin-made items are only on loan. The mistrust here is not born of ignorance, but of an irreconcilable clash of values. And yet wizards never bother to understand the goblin perspective. Instead, they brand goblins as greedy and treacherous, conveniently ignoring the centuries of exploitation that fuel their resentment. It is tempting to think that these contradictions exist only in the margins of wizarding life, yet they are embedded in the laws and institutions of the magical world. The Ministry of Magic, in its classification system, decides who is a being and who is a beast. This distinction should be logical based on intelligence or magical capacity, but in practice it reflects political expedience. Centaurs rejected the title of being to avoid sharing status with vampires and were promptly lumped in with creatures considered dangerous. Werewolves, though human most of the time, were saddled with oppressive laws that restricted their movement and rights. This bureaucratic manipulation reveals a society more concerned with control than justice, one where the ministry's labels determine destiny more than inherent qualities ever could. The strangeness deepens when one considers how often wizards rely on these very creatures. During the Battle of Hogwarts, house elves fought bravely, centaurs joined the defense, and even giants, led by Hagrid's half-brother Grawp, clashed with Death Eaters. Those who were long treated as lesser beings became crucial allies in the fight for survival, and yet, after Voldemort's fall, there is little evidence that their sacrifices led to lasting change. The wizarding world returned to its old hierarchies, grateful in the moment, but unwilling to dismantle the structures of prejudice that kept these creatures on the margins. This amnesia underscores the deep-rooted nature of bias in the wizarding mind. The contradictions surrounding magical creatures also expose the fragility of wizarding superiority. Wizards pride themselves on wand magic, yet many creatures perform feats beyond their abilities. The Patronus charm, one of the most advanced defensive spells, requires immense skill, yet a Dementor, a non-human entity, can effortlessly destroy happiness and hope. House elves, without wands, can overpower seasoned witches and wizards. Centaurs interpret the movements of the stars, seeing patterns and destinies wizards cannot grasp, and giants wield brute force capable of shattering magical defenses. Wizards cling to their belief in superiority not because it is true, but because acknowledging the might. Equality of these beings would unravel the fragile fabric of their society. This strangeness, this refusal to treat magical creatures consistently, reflects a deeper fear within wizarding culture. Fear of losing control, fear of admitting vulnerability, fear of facing the possibility that wizards are not the unquestioned rulers of their world. By marginalizing giants, restricting werewolves, enslaving elves, and distrusting goblins, they build walls that keep the illusion intact. But these walls are fragile, as Voldemort's rise and fall demonstrated. He exploited divisions, recruited giants and werewolves by offering them what wizarding society denied. Prejudice did not protect the wizarding world, it nearly destroyed it. The irony is that the characters who succeed in bridging these divides are often those who defy convention. Hagrid, half-giant, embraces creatures others fear and finds loyalty where others see danger. Hermione, though ridiculed for her activism, recognizes the injustice of elf enslavement. Harry himself earns the trust of centaurs, goblins, and house elves by treating them with respect. These moments show that the wizarding world could be different, that its strangeness is not an inevitability but a choice. The question remains whether wizards will learn from these examples or continue repeating old patterns. In truth, the presence of magical creatures reveals the moral cracks in wizarding civilization. They are not simply dangers or decorations, not threats or ornaments for wizarding convenience. They are mirrors, reflecting the prejudices and hypocrisies of those who claim to govern them. The wizarding world is strange not because such beings exist, but because of the arbitrary lines drawn between respect and rejection, between inclusion and exclusion. The inconsistency is what shocks most. A society capable of extraordinary magic, yet unable to extend basic fairness to those who share their world. At its heart, this contradiction makes the wizarding world feel both wondrous and unsettling. The existence of giants, centaurs, goblins, and werewolves should have expanded the horizons of wizard imagination. Instead, their treatment shrinks the wizarding vision, reducing beings of immense potential to roles of servant, menace, or curiosity. The true strangeness is not the creatures themselves, but the inability of wizards to embrace the diversity of magic that surrounds them. For in a world where goblins guard gold but are denied trust, where centaurs see the stars but are cast into the forest, where elves wield power but are enslaved, one must ask, who are the real beasts in this story? Number 22. Random spells by children. In the magical world of Harry Potter, one of the strangest and most unsettling elements is the phenomenon of accidental magic among children. J.K. Rowling describes it as a natural, uncontrollable force, a raw surge of power that surfaces when a child is frightened, upset, or desperate. But if we pause to consider it carefully, the scale of these occurrences is staggering. Thousands of magical children are born every generation, each with years of unpredictable outbursts before their first trip to Hogwarts. The implications for the secrecy of the wizarding world are enormous, and the fact that Muggles remain mostly oblivious seems almost impossible to believe. Rowling provides vivid examples of these early outbursts. The most memorable comes from Harry himself, when he tries to flee Dudley's gang and suddenly finds himself on the roof of the school. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the narration makes it plain. When Harry had been frightened, he had suddenly found himself on the school roof. Such teleportation, unlearned and uncontrolled, is not only extraordinary but also highly visible. Teachers, classmates, and even passers-by might have seen a boy vanish and reappear. Yet the world in the story accepts that it was written off as coincidence or mischief. For one child it might be overlooked, but multiplied across generations it stretches credibility. The Dursleys, of course, attempted to suppress every flicker of strangeness, insisting to Harry that nothing unusual had ever happened. But even they could not erase the memory of a haircut that regrew overnight, or a jumper that shrank to doll size when Harry refused to wear it. Petunia Dursley once confesses, "After all, your mother did that sort of thing too." She herself had witnessed accidental magic and knew it was real. The problem becomes clear. If even hostile guardians could not deny what they saw, how could entire towns and neighborhoods across Britain fail to recognize the same in their own children? Nor is Harry the only case. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Marge Dursley inflates like a balloon after insulting Harry's parents, an accident so visible that the Ministry of Magic must intervene. The fact that the Ministry has an entire department dedicated to magical law enforcement implies that these accidental bursts happen frequently enough to warrant a system of cover-ups. Obliviators exist to wipe Muggle memories, suggesting that the wizarding world relies heavily on them to maintain secrecy. Yet the scale still boggles the mind. If every magical child can grow furious and blow up a lamp, teleport out of a supermarket, or transform a teacher's wig, the Ministry must be working endlessly to suppress panic. This brings us to the parents themselves. Muggle-born witches and wizards like Hermione Granger or Lily Evans once lived in perfectly ordinary homes until their letters arrived. Imagine the Evans household when Lily, as a child, made a flower bloom out of season or lifted herself into the air from a swing. Her sister Petunia watched with resentment, but her parents surely saw it too. Rowling never describes them panicking, yet one can only imagine the confusion. In any ordinary family, a child sprouting strange powers would cause alarm. Questions about doctors, psychologists, or even supernatural explanations would arise, and yet the books assume these incidents were quietly ignored. Consider also Neville Longbottom, who recalls in Philosopher's Stone that his family feared he might be a squib because his magic did not show early enough. In desperation, his great-uncle Algy threw him out of a window. The boy bounced unharmed, proving his magical nature. The story is delivered almost comically, but in reality it represents a terrifying truth. Families of magical heritage not only expect accidents, but actively provoke them to test a child's ability. If such reckless displays are part of tradition, then how many neighbors, shopkeepers, or schoolmates must have seen things they could not explain? One explanation might be the adaptability of the human mind. Rowling often shows Muggles excusing what they cannot understand. When Harry makes the glass vanish at the zoo, releasing the boa constrictor, Dudley's parents blame him for mischief, not magic. "It was like the glass had vanished," Dudley cries, but Vernon Dursley refuses to accept the obvious. Perhaps Rowling is hinting that most people, when faced with the impossible, choose denial. They may prefer to believe in tricks, accidents, or imagination rather than confront a truth that rewrites their worldview. Still, denial alone feels insufficient. The accumulation of countless small miracles visible in homes and streets would create patterns impossible to ignore. How many school teachers across Britain mark their registers while watching a child's hair grow back overnight? How many neighbours heard the crash of a lamp exploding with no cause? The Ministry of Magic must therefore act constantly, a hidden hand erasing memories, repairing damage and manipulating events so that the fragile barrier between worlds remains intact. The books give us glimpses of this but rarely reveal the sheer logistical nightmare it must involve. This strangeness becomes even more striking when we think about international wizarding communities. Magical children exist in France, Bulgaria, and Egypt, each producing their own uncontrolled surges of power. If in every country a government body must quietly erase evidence and soothe terrified parents, then the global wizarding world is running a permanent crisis operation. Accidental magic is not an occasional spark. It is the universal sign of magical birth. A planet of billions must hold millions of magical children across centuries, and yet the secret still holds. The improbability of such silence is enormous. The storytelling charm lies in how Rowling presents this chaos as ordinary. Wizards accept it, parents endure it, and Muggles forget it. The contrast between Harry's terror on the school roof and the calm acceptance in the narrative illustrates this perfectly. For the boy, the experience is bewildering, even frightening. For the world of wizards, it is simply proof of what he is. The tension between personal astonishment and cultural normalization explains why such strangeness never erupts into public scandal. And yet consider the psychological toll on children themselves. Hermione, Lily, and countless others must have grown up aware that they were different. A toy flying across a room, a sibling's hair turning green, or a pet vanishing and reappearing. These are not experiences one can explain away easily. For some children, it might create pride and excitement. For others, it might produce fear of being abnormal. The books rarely explore this deeply, but every witch and wizard carries years of secrets before stepping onto the Hogwarts Express. There is also the danger of exposure through sheer scale of witnesses. When Harry regrows his hair overnight, perhaps only the Dursleys see it. But when he jumps behind bins and reappears on a roof, schoolmates must have been present. Teachers in the playground, children on swings, and parents waiting at gates could not have missed it. The fact that society does not question it shows either an extraordinary efficiency of obliviators or an almost supernatural force of ignorance woven into the wizarding world itself. Rowling never explains it fully, leaving us to wonder whether magic subtly influences Muggle perception, bending reality so they dismiss the impossible unconsciously. This idea gains weight when we recall the moment in Prisoner of Azkaban when Aunt Marge inflates. The Ministry swiftly intervenes, correcting the disaster before it reaches newspapers. The implication is clear. There exists a vast hidden bureaucracy smoothing out the chaos left by children and adults alike. For every spectacular accident we read about, there must be 100 smaller ones erased from Muggle minds. The secrecy of the magical world, then, does not rest on the silence of wizards alone, but on an active manipulation of memory and perception that spans every town and city. The strangeness of accidental magic is therefore not only in its unpredictability, but in its invisibility. It is a system so fragile that it should collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, yet within the narrative it remains intact. The Evans family never calls a scientist, the Dursleys never contact a priest, and Harry's classmates never report his vanishing act to the press. Reality bends to the needs of secrecy, and in doing so reveals one of the oddest truths in the Harry Potter universe. The world is not simply magical, it is constructed around a conspiracy of forgetting. When we step back and examine it, the existence of accidental magic raises profound questions about the boundary between Muggle and wizard. Every witch and wizard begins life in two worlds, visible to both, yet one is taught to deny what it sees while the other learns to accept. It is a paradox, a strange balance of denial and revelation, where a frightened child on a school roof can be simultaneously impossible and inevitable. The fact that the wizarding world survives this contradiction is perhaps the greatest magic of all. Number 23. Wizard's clothing. Stuck in time. Of all the eccentricities in the wizarding world, none feels more stubborn and bewildering than the question of clothing. Generations of witches and wizards continue to drape themselves in heavy robes, flowing cloaks and conical hats, as though they stepped out of a medieval tapestry rather than a bustling London street. This refusal to adapt is not merely a background detail. It shapes entire encounters in the books and reveals the cultural isolation that defines wizarding society. When Harry first notices how the ministry officials or even his professors present themselves, he cannot help but recognize the striking difference from the world he grew up in. The robes are not costumes for special occasions, but the default uniform of daily life, an intentional anchor to tradition that resists the tides of modern fashion. One of the clearest examples of this cultural gap comes with Arthur Weasley's disastrous attempt at wearing a Muggle suit during the Quidditch World Cup in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Rowling describes how Arthur appeared at the campsite, enthusiastic but hopelessly confused, having placed a pair of pinstripe trousers around his neck instead of wearing them as intended. Arthur appeared in a suit, but he had put on the trousers instead of a tie. It is a comical image, but it also underscores the sheer unfamiliarity of Muggle clothing to even the most well-meaning wizard. Arthur is not only fascinated by plugs and batteries, but he is also genuinely eager to bridge the gap between the two worlds. Yet his inability to dress appropriately reveals how deep the separation runs and how alien the concept of fashion evolution is for wizards. This raises a question that haunts the background of the entire series. Why has wizarding culture remained so static? Wizards live in the same Britain as their non-magical counterparts, read the same newspapers when they choose to, and share the same geography. While Hogwarts is hidden and Diagon Alley tucked away, the very streets and landscapes overlap. A witch walking down Charing Cross Road must at some point notice the evolution of coats, hats, and trousers, and yet wizarding society remains unshaken, draped in fabrics that look centuries old. It is not technology or enchantments that keep robes in fashion, but an unyielding conservatism, a cultural insistence that tradition outweighs practicality. This conservatism is not subtle. Throughout the books, wizards who attempt to dress like Muggles are almost always mocked or portrayed as eccentric. Dumbledore in The Sorcerer's Stone is described arriving on Privet Drive wearing a purple cloak and high-heeled boots with silver buckles. He makes no attempt to disguise himself, and the narrative shows that he does not even think of doing so. To Dumbledore, the wizarding identity is expressed through flamboyant, timeless garments that reject Muggle conventions. This suggests that the clothing is more than attire. It is a declaration of separation, a uniform of belonging to a hidden world that refuses to conform to outside standards. The persistence of robes also reflects how little wizarding society values innovation outside of magic itself. For Muggles, clothing is a canvas for technological progress, fashion cycles, and self-expression. In the magical world, however, progress is measured through spellcraft, potion-making, and magical creatures. Why would a witch bother with buttons or zippers when a simple charm can adjust a robe instantly? Why concern oneself with seasonal fabrics when an enchantment can repel water or warm the wearer in winter? The very practicality of magic might encourage stagnation in areas where Muggles innovate. Wizards do not need fashion because their magic solves the problems that fashion often addresses. Yet the refusal to adopt new clothing styles sometimes veers into absurdity. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when the Ministry of Magic sends wizards to the Muggle campsite for the Quidditch World Cup, we see a parade of eccentric outfits. Wizards wear long, flowered nightgowns, ponchos with sequins and combinations of cloaks and galoshes that make little sense. These outfits attract the attention and suspicion of Muggles, forcing Ministry employees to constantly modify memories. What could have been solved by a simple pair of jeans and a t-shirt instead becomes a farcical exercise in cultural stubbornness. The insistence on robes not only isolates the magical community, but also creates unnecessary friction whenever they brush against the non-magical world. Characters like Sirius Black provide another angle. After his escape from Azkaban, Sirius hides in the form of a large black dog, but when he finally reveals himself, he is wearing old wizard's robes, ragged and filthy. The sight emphasizes not only his imprisonment, but also his connection to a society that has not updated its appearance in centuries. Even in disguise, even when survival depends on blending in, robes dominate the image of a wizard. They are not simply clothes, they are a cultural prison of their own, signifying belonging to a hidden order that never evolves.